Range Ronin is reviewing a Model 637 revolver. I am going to watch this.
When one thinks of a small, lightweight revolver, a Smith Wesson model like the 637-2 Airweight comes to mind. Hey, it's the Range Ronin. Stick with me, because I'm going to tell you all about one. Smith & Wesson small-framed revolvers are by far their most popular and have been going strong nearly 70 years, starting with the introduction of the Chief Special back in 1950. This traditional 5-shot 38 Special revolver with an exposed hammer was immensely popular and spawned several variants, including the aluminum frame Model 37. It retained the traditional lines of the Model 36, but was lighter in weight. Although the Model 37 is no longer in production, its stainless steel offspring, the Model 637, is still alive and kicking. Like the old Model 37, the Model 637 has an aluminum frame, but the cylinder and barrel are all made of stainless steel. The 637 also bears some of the uglier new Smith & Wesson features, like the key lock above the cylinder release and the lack of a hammer-mounted firing pin. But operationally, the gun boasts the same lines and function of the original. The 637, fully loaded, weighs 15.5 ounces and sports a 1.875-inch barrel. Pistol has a hammer spur that allows the gun to be fired in single action with a light trigger pull, or it can be fired in double action by simply pulling the trigger. The Model 637 and other small-frame Smith & Wesson revolvers are thought of as a gun with two purposes: concealed carry and up-close and personal work. These guns are lightweight, and their curved appearance naturally blends with the natural curves of the body, yet they pack a real punch and boast a reliability that still endear many people to these little guns, even given that small semi-automatic pistols have come a long way since 1950. Sights consist of a ramped and serrated front sight with an integral to the frame rear sight, which is not an uncommon sight arrangement on a small revolver meant for up-close and personal work. The front sight is easy to pick up within the notched rear sight, and there is very little space between the sides of the front sight and the notch of the rear sight. If you actually get to use the sights, there is a very small margin for error, thus contributing to the point and shoot characteristics of the revolver. As with most revolvers, there is something called the flash gap, the cylinder to forcing cone gap, and that is something that you don't want your support hand or any digit of either firing or support hand close to. The flash gap on this particular specimen is right at 6/1000ths of an inch, which is well within the industry standard of 4/1000ths to 8/1000ths of an inch. Double action trigger pull is, of course, much heavier than with a semi-automatic pistol, but the single action trigger pull rivals even some of the best single action triggers that I have pulled. The double action trigger pull was right at 11 pounds 4.3 ounces, while the single action trigger pull weight measured in at 1 pound 9.1 ounces, and that's pretty impressive coming from a double action single action revolver. The double action trigger travel is heavy, but smooth throughout its travel, and is without any sign of stacking, and has a relatively easy to find staging point, that point where the trigger goes slightly slack and only a minor pulling of the trigger after that point drops the hammer, which it does very efficiently. The single action hammer trip point is very close to the back side of the trigger guard and occurs with no perceptible trigger over travel. For defensive use of the 637, double action mode is more than adequate to use and is the recommended mode from which to operate. As with most double action single action revolvers, total trigger reset is almost completely to the extreme front of its total travel. With regard to the trigger guard, a heavily gloved hand may find that inserting the trigger finger into the trigger guard somewhat of a challenge. After all, the 637 is a compact revolver and trigger space is at a premium with the size of a revolver. The Model 637 has a rubber grip that wraps around the front of the grip frame. Although this lacks some of the classic feel of the original walnut grips that came on the M37, I was sure it would be of benefit, as the 637 is rated for +P ammunition. Like any other J-frame, or its clones, the 637 is loaded by pushing forward on the cylinder release and pushing the cylinder out to expose the chambers. You can now load 5 individual cartridges by hand, speed strip, or drop them in all at once with a speed loader. Close the cylinder and you are ready to fire. Unloading is just as straightforward, by opening the gun and giving a firm smack on the ejector rod to throw the cases from the chambers, as simply pushing the ejector rod is not enough to expel spent cases. And speaking of spent cases, let's spend a few at my first range outing with the Smith Wesson 637-2 Lightweight. Don't be surprised if the web of your hand stings after a few shots of that +P ammunition. The grip of the 637 is hand-filling, except your pinky will be likely to hang off the bottom. The gun feels great in the hand, but the aluminum backstrap is exposed and it comes straight back into the hand when firing. This isn't a bother with standard pressure loads, as recoil is somewhat mild, but the higher pressure +P loads come out with authority on both ends. That sort of recoil would induce bad habits like flinching. The result is wild shots, which isn't good when you are limited to only 5 shots. The reload isn't excellent either. The gun, like most snub-nosed revolvers, has a short ejector rod. Cases won't clear the chambers with a full stroke of the rod, but will be started out. However, a sharp smack of the rod with the pistol's muzzle skyward meant 100% reliability of extraction. The grip, despite being generously recessed, isn't conducive to same-hand reloads, either using HKS speed loaders or others, aside from speed strips. I usually grip the revolver in my left hand to unload and reload the pistol, and that was necessary to reload the pistol with any speed. with a speed loader, sometimes needing a shake to drop the rounds. In short, you won't be reloading the 637 under stress. Having said that, the 637 performed very well at the range, with no hiccups in ejection or firing. In short, reliability was 100%. Despite the lack of good sights and a long yet smooth double-action trigger pull, I got to coax some decent accuracy out of the gun. All firing was clearly enough for social work.
First cold bore shots. P-holing going on there. Not surprising out of this shorter revolver. Arm score 158 grain, 38 special, standard load. Pretty stout recoil out of a Airweight. Just with standard loads. Right in the trigger finger. This is 158 grain. Semi-wide cutter hollow point, Georgia orange, plus P. It's got some punch. With the hand. One more cylinder, 5 rounds. I think Frosty the Snowman is feeling the effect, and so am I. That's it, folks.
This range day with the Smith Wesson 637 Airweight went off just as expected. I was not looking for accuracy per se, whereas functioning and perceived felt recoil was topping my list of things to observe. Perceived felt recoil was not surprising to me, given the size and weight of the revolver. With standard pressure 158 grain loads, felt recoil was within acceptable limits. Plus P ammunition, like the 158 grain semi-wide cutter hollow point that I was shooting, felt recoil was slamming into the web of the shooting hand, with enough force to leave a mild bruise. In addition, when the trigger was resetting, the snap of the trigger going forward was straight into the trigger finger. I would fully release the trigger after every shot, and then remove my trigger finger off of the face of the trigger to prepare for the next shot. Accuracy-wise, what you see is what I expected. As mentioned, I was not going for accuracy. Front sight is hard to see, and I just wanted to get as close to the center mass as I could, and do so repeatedly. As you can see, repeatability was not a strong suit. Nonetheless, all shots would have inflicted damage on a live target. You may have noticed the keyholing that was occurring with the Armscore ammunition, but not with the Georgia Arms ammunition, at least not as much. I am placing the blame on the Armscore ammunition and not the firearm. Some ammunition intended for short-barreled firearms may be a good option to try. Unfortunately, I did not have any with me today. My takeaway of today's session with the Smith Wesson 637 Airweight is, and if I depended on this revolver for self-protection, standard 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter hollow point rounds would be my choice, which has been the standard load for a very long time, in any size, 38 Special or even 357 Magnum revolver. All in all, I was satisfied with today's range time. Smith & Wesson 637 Airweight would definitely serve well in the role of an up-close and personal defense handgun. So, with range time behind me, let me mention carrying this Petite performer. The beauty of a snub-nosed revolver is the carry properties. In a suitable holster, a revolver like the Smith & Wesson 637 can be housed and carried in a myriad of ways. Strong side OWB or IWB, cross draw OWB or IWB, appendix, shoulder, belly band, vest or coat pocket, pants pocket, or fanny pack. The advantages of an airweight revolver with regard to carrying one are many. Of course, the downside is when a revolver must be fired, but I talked about that during the range session and showed my method of keeping felt recoil at least to a tolerable level. The heavy double-action trigger pull is a definite plus to the safety side, while not being adversely heavy to bring into action very quickly for those all-important first shots. Now, let me get to my final thoughts regarding the Smith & Wesson Model 637 Airweight. What I also found about the 637 is just how challenging small revolvers are to shoot. Nothing new, but I am reminded of such every time I hold one in my hand. The accuracy was acceptable, but trigger control is vital when using a double-action revolver versus a striker-fired pistol owing to the long trigger pull. Also, worth mentioning is the sharp recoil the gun generates with plus P ammunition. Despite that the 637 and J-frame revolvers in general are harder to shoot well, I feel this gun is a good buy. It has the Smith & Wesson build quality that shooters have come to expect for years and lives up to its reputation for absolute reliability. You will be unlikely to encounter problems with the 637 right out of the box, which should give you the flexibility to learn to adapt to fast firing with the double-action trigger, which is quite good for its class when pitted against guns like the Taurus Model 85 and Charter Arms Undercover. There is a lot of debate going on about the merits of even having a revolver with an exposed hammer. That is a debate for another day, though personally, I prefer an exposed hammer to be able to press the gun into service in other facets, like teaching a newer shooter or for pest control. Though the hammer may or may not snag on the draw in a self-defense situation, I like to have options. It is easy to disqualify the 637 as a pocket gun, but it carries on the belt very nicely, if not forgettable. What I can say with certainty is that the 637 is a solid revolver in the small revolver market, and for those who favor something they can carry all day, the 637 just might be a revolver to research. Well, my friend, once again I get to close yet another chapter in this firearm journey and journal of mine. I hope that you found it useful and will return for more of my firearm and firearm-related reviews. Until we meet up again, stay healthy, stay vigilant, stay armed, and stay safe wherever your journeys take you.